Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Michelle here from happyhealthyher.com. And in this week's compassionate chat, we are going deeper into the underbelly of narcissistic behavior. We're exploring 50 shades of narcissism, the many ways that narcissists use and abuse others. It's going to be a bit of a lightning round approach because I'm going to run through 50 different tactics that narcissistic people tend to exhibit, particularly when manipulating sensitive or empathetic people. Some of these are obvious and some will shock you since they are so common in terms of our societal norms. Like me, you might not have even realized how harmful these tactics can be. Sadly, a good portion of what is actually negative behavior is considered normal, when in fact it is unhealthy and draining to be around. So the ultimate goal of today's chat is that you learn to recognize negative or bullying behavior so that you don't get depleted by them or take on the shame, guilt, or abuse that they are intending. I want you to be able to protect yourself and recognize that you deserve better than negative treatment. If you miss any of the items or you want to ponder on them more, I created a blog with all of the 50 items, and that's going to be linked below. It'll take you over to happyhealthyher.com. So we got a lot of ground to cover. It's almost like a crash course in narcissism, so buckle up. Here is number one, and that is that they get people to do things for them. So we actually talked about this in a previous video on the common element that occurs with narcissistic people. They get people to do things for them, they manipulate other people, and generally there's no reciprocity. Life should be a give and take, and with a narcissistic person, it's all take. Number two, they overtly brag about themselves. Now, this is one of those obvious ones, but it can really drain you if you're around someone who's just constantly bragging about themselves. Number three, exhibiting little or no genuine empathy. They don't actually care about your feelings or your needs. Now, empathy is truly like being able to put yourself in another person's shoes, sort of understanding that their perspective might be a little bit different than yours, or that their needs are different, or even that their feelings are different. And someone who lacks empathy cannot recognize that, and they don't even try. So it makes it very hard to be around someone like that, especially if you're empathetic and you're trying to understand their needs and feelings. Number four, displaying a lack of self-awareness. So they have no idea how they come across, and they really don't care. So when they're doing the bragging, and when they're manipulating, and when they're just sort of taking from you, they really are not reflecting on any of that. If you're a conscientious person, you're constantly thinking, oh gosh, was I awkward? Oh, did I say the wrong thing? But with a narcissistic person, they're not thinking like that. They're just plowing ahead, meeting their own agenda, not really caring how they come across to other people. Number five, they always redirect the conversation to themselves. So if you're in a friendship with someone like this, it gets exhausting. You try to share something of deep personal meaning to you, and they listen for 2 seconds, and then it's back on to what they want to talk about. It becomes really clear that they're not really listening to you, and they're certainly not empathizing or actually participating with you in the conversation. It's a one-way conversation where they're doing all the directing of the talking and the narrative. Number six, they use projection. This means that they actually accuse you of all their most negative traits or actions. It's thought that with narcissists, an accusation is actually an admission of guilt. So I dated someone who accused me of dating other men, and I was so confused because I wasn't doing that at all. I hadn't been on the apps. I was fully committed to him. But come to find out, of course, he was dating other women, or at least he had someone that he was talking to on the side. So a very common thing for a narcissist to do. Number 7, they're hypocritical. They follow a do as I say, not as I do approach. So they will often accuse other people of being too judgmental of them, which is by nature them judging other people. So you can see there's a little bit of irony in there. Don't judge me, but I'm allowed to judge you for judging me. They truly, the bottom line is they don't want to be held to the standards that they hold for everyone else. Number 8, they're always changing the rules. So this is common in a connection where it's sort of cemented in, meaning like you take a job or you marry someone. Once you are actually in that role, it's sort of like there's no going back. But what the narcissistic person will do is suddenly change all the rules that existed before you took the job or before you got married. So a manager who tells you there's total flexibility, you can telecommute, and as soon as you start the job, they're like, oh yeah, by the way, we really can't let you telecommute. Maybe you can come, you can work in your home once a week or once a month. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not what you said at all. With a partner, like a romantic partner or marriage, it's when your spouse suddenly stops doing any of the responsibilities that you had agreed on, your household and parenting responsibilities. So they start to shift it where you're doing more and more and more of the work. And it's a really negative dynamic, but you'll feel it happen and it feels incredibly disempowering because what you've been told and the standards you've been living by are suddenly changed. Number 9, they actively seek fame and fortune, lots of money. They're trying to feel superior to others. So a lot of us are just like looking to get by, live a happy, healthy life, pay our bills. But someone who's narcissistic is literally actively seeking to be in the grandiose nature of being famous and rich. Number 10, being excessively greedy. They take just to take and not because they need something. So I had this example with someone I knew for a long time. They would go to weddings, and at the end of the wedding, like, you know how there's always like wedding favors left over, the matchbooks or the votive candles, just like the sweet sentimental things that the bride and groom have offered to their guests. Well, this person would walk around and take all the remaining favors. Sometimes like 10, 12 things that they would bring home. One time they actually went to a Buddhist wedding. They were not Buddhist. And they took all these like adorable little Buddha statues off of the tables and brought them home. And I thought, why on earth would you ever do that when you're not Buddhist, you're not interested in that? But they just did it to do it. They did it because they could, and they did this frequently. They always had their hand out. They were always taking things from other people. And this is a very common pattern for someone who's narcissistic. Number 11, they're superficial. So everything is about appearance and status, the exterior. Designer clothes, fancy cars, and portraying this perfect image out to the world. Meanwhile, they have debt, their family's falling apart. It's very rarely what they're portraying. But they don't really care because they're really only concerned with the image. Number 12, they aren't interested in self-growth, and they find those kinds of efforts to be odd. They don't believe they have flaws or anything that they should be working on. So why would they want to work on themselves? Why would they need to grow? This was actually something I would ask when I was in online dating. I would ask people, what are they trying to work on themselves? It's a really great indicator into someone's ability to see their own weaknesses. I mean, all of us have weaknesses that we could stand to work on. And someone who's narcissistic, though, does not believe that is true and doesn't find value in actually improving themselves. Number 13, using negative nonverbal communication. So it's estimated that 90% of communication is nonverbal and includes things like tone and body language. So rolling their eyes or sighing or the silent treatment or just looking away when you're talking to them. These are all really dismissive and damaging ways that someone interacts with you. And they're very intentional, but they're hard to pinpoint. Now, I was with someone for a really long time that anytime I asked them for anything, they'd sigh, ugh, what now? It was like constantly making the assumption that I was over asking or I was being naggy. And so I stopped asking. And I ended up doing most of the things in our household by myself because it just got too hard to ask someone who reacted in that way. He was basically training me to behave that way and to do all the things for him. Number 14, they sneer or they smirk at you. So this is a very specific and passive-aggressive form of negative body language that a sensitive person is going to be particularly aware of, and you'll feel it as quite threatening. So I've seen this quite a bit, and it's maybe what you might call mean girl energy. If a woman is like staring at you or glaring at you or looking you up and down, and it's very obvious that they are displeased with you somehow or they don't like you at first sight, and it can feel really uncomfortable, and everything is energy. So when someone is sneering or smirking at you, they are literally throwing shade your way, and you're gonna feel it. It's a very negative situation to find yourself in. Number 15, they're happy when other people have hardships. So this is really scary to observe, but it's a very clear indication that someone lacks empathy. But for example, I had someone who laughed at how cranky their sister was, but the sister was dying of a really terrible disease. And they thought it was funny that they were cranky, rather than be like empathetic that this poor person that they supposedly loved was going through such a rough time. It's a really clear indication that someone lacks empathy and that they are outright cruel if they're happy about other people's dysfortune. Number 16 is making snarky or insulting comments. So people act like this is normal or funny, yet it's really not. It's cruel. There's a difference between teasing someone and actually being snarky or negative, and the line is pretty thin. Like usually you can tell, but there's a lot of people who do that. They're snarky on social media or they're rude to people, and it's very much a way of dismissing other people. Even if it doesn't seem that way, it seems like someone's just being funny. That's oftentimes not the intent. Number 17, justifying their insensitive behavior by then adding insult to injury. So they'll say something like, I wouldn't have been so rude if you weren't so annoying, or I was only telling the truth, you're too sensitive. So what they're really doing is bullying you and then shaming you for having a normal reaction to the negativity. It's like a double whammy, and it feels really awful. Number 18, springing things on you. So this is like the manager who keeps giving you an unexpected meetings, or like a significant other who doesn't tell you that there's a party coming up. It's actually a form of gaslighting, because what it is doing is it's giving you the inability to be prepared. And if you are someone who likes to plan and be prepared, like I happen to be and many sensitive people are, you don't get to do all that processing. So it is actually an intentional way for a person to cause another person distress. So if you've seen this with a manager, they might have a meeting, call a meeting, and email you with a very vague, I need to speak to you this evening before you leave. And so then you're hours at your desk thinking, oh my gosh, what did I do? What is this about? A normal, healthy person would actually tell you what it's going to be about so that you didn't have to worry. But someone who's narcissistic is going to intentionally make you worry, even if it's something that is not that important at all. Number 19 is using vague criticisms. So you might ask, how's dinner? And they reply with, it's fine. I mean, it's very clear with that response that they're not happy with what you've prepared, but they won't tell you how to make it better. Or they ask questions that imply that something you did wasn't right, like, why'd you do it like that? Yet, again, they refuse to help or correct or improve the situation, which leaves you feeling disempowered and helpless. Now, I am a writer, and I've had many different scenarios with managers where they did this. Now, most writers will say, we all need proofreaders, we all need editors, and when someone gives you constructive feedback, that is fantastic because it makes your work better. But if you have someone who's reading your work and then gives you just a vague response like, well, I didn't really love it, or I'm not sure why you chose that format, or I think it could be shorter. Like, those are very vague corrections, and it makes it super hard to actually edit the work because you have really no idea what the person wants from you. This is intentional. It's very intentional, and it's done, again, to sort of exert the person's power over you and to make you feel like you have no control. Number 20, using very direct, harsh criticism. So this is the opposite. You know, we go with the vague. Well, this one's someone who is direct and extremely harsh. So I had a manager who had initially praised a project I had done. And then she became angry a few years later when I told her I couldn't do the same project because we didn't have the same staffing situation. I didn't have a team of people to help me, so I couldn't give all my energy to that particular project. Well, she calls a meeting, and in front of my entire team, she exclaims, well, that project was useless anyway. So I also know a very narcissistic woman who referred to her children as useless anytime they didn't do something that she liked. Now, it's probably clear to most empathetic people that words like useless and disappointing or you're a failure or it's a failure are incredibly hurtful and shame-inducing. Healthy people know that. An abusive person also knows it, but they're doing it to cut others down. They'll use those words for that purpose. So, number 21, exerting their power needlessly and excessively. So this would be the manager who forces you to work late on a project, which you later learn wasn't due for weeks. They're letting you know that that they are the boss and they have control over you. And it feels, again, very disempowering to be around someone like that. Number 22, being actively disrespectful of others' time. So very similar to the last scenario, I had a manager who would change meeting times haphazardly without concern for anyone else's schedule. They felt entitled and way more important than everyone else. So we had a standing meeting a certain day of the week, and my entire team would all like scurry into the waiting area of her office with our notebooks and our pens ready to take notes because she always gave us a ton of work. And probably a good 75% of the time, the executive assistant would say, oh, she's not ready for you, or she's on a call, or I'll let you know. And we'd all go back to our desks, and then we'd be waiting, which was like lack of productivity. You couldn't get anything done because you're just waiting for her to call you. And when she was finally ready, sometimes it was 15 minutes, sometimes it was a half an hour to 45 minutes. When she was ready, it was snap, snap. Everybody run to get into your places in her office. It was absolutely ridiculous. Number 23, using your vulnerabilities to shame and dismiss you. This is the person who, this is of course an actual description, calls you the skinny bitch behind your back because they think you're too thin. And meanwhile, they know that you have a thyroid condition that has caused your weight to fluctuate. So this is an actual situation. I had someone who was actually very overweight who would always talk about me behind my back at parties, but behind my back, but loudly. So I was very aware that it was happening. And it was always, I was the skinny bitch. I was nothing but nice to this person, but she just liked to call me that. And it was really harsh. I never wanted to go to parties because I felt like, why would I want to be around this person who's actually doing this when she knew, because she knew my story, she knew my health stuff, but she didn't care. She was using it to make herself feel better. So number 24 is rallying other people to be on their side. So it's very common for narcissistic people to have large groups of friends, large groups of supporters, those who actually will support them in everything that they do and all the things that they need. This is typically referred to as flying monkeys, like in The Wizard of Oz, the monkeys that actually helped the Witch of the West. It's the same dynamic with a narcissist that has a team of people. They will side with the narcissistic person at all costs, which leaves their target to feel ganged up on. If you're in a friend group, let's say, with someone who's a head honcho narcissist, and they decide that you've done something they don't like, they're going to get the whole rest of the group to gang up on you and to dislike you. They're going to tell stories about you, and you're going to suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I'm losing all my friends because this one person. Number 25, backstabbing and sharing your secrets publicly. So this is very similar to exposing your vulnerabilities, but in this instance, I'm thinking of an acquaintance had actually met up with me for like a coffee one day. And she was kind of picking my brain about my relationship. And I was being very honest with her about my vulnerabilities. I was telling her that when I had, at the time, this is when I was married, and I was telling her that I had been initially really insecure when I first started dating the man who was going to become my husband, because he was 11 years older, and that was like a hard thing for me. And she listened, and she seemed to be really empathetic. And then we were out months later, probably 6 months later, we went out with another friend to go dancing, and we're at a club, and a man comes up to me to ask me to dance, and she yells, "Don't dance with her, she only likes old men." And I was like completely mortified. I mean, it was so cruel. And of course, this person exhibited other behaviors that were similar, but I got to a point where I was like, I can't even talk to them anymore because I realized how hurtful they were. Number 26, actively dismissing your hurt with criticisms or disbelief. So narcissistic people will readily victim blame. They'll say things like, geez, suck it up, buttercup, or learn to take a joke. They're actually, again, bullying you, shaming you, and not actually honoring the pains that you might be experiencing or the difficult situations you're in. They always seem to think everyone else is less equipped to handle things than they are. But if they actually have things happen to them, they're the first person to tend to be victimized and act as though they are a victim. Number 27, laughing at the things you say. Now, in this case, they're not laughing with you. They're literally laughing at you. The tone and the nature generally make it clear that they're dismissing you and trying to make you feel small. So number 28, they constantly make fun of others. Their insecurity requires them to mock others all the time, even the people they supposedly love. So you'll feel very uncomfortable around someone like this because you know as soon as you're turning your back, they're making fun of you too. Number 29, not paying attention to you. So they will look away or they'll focus on their phone when you're talking to them. It's just a very clear that they're not interested in anything that you have to say, anything that you're doing. They just really will not give you their time or their attention directly and fully. The manager I was referring to about who always held the meetings would hold a meeting and actually be on her phone the entire time. I'd never witnessed anything like that in my whole career, and luckily I've never witnessed it again. But they'd pretend like they're listening to you. You'd be talking directly to them and they'd be like, yep, okay. And it was just horrible. It was so disrespectful and so ridiculous. So number 30, they tell you how you feel or say they know how you feel when they really don't. They're trying to pretend they have empathy, but their assumptions are generally wrong. And it becomes clear that they don't actually care about your true feelings because they don't ask you. I mean, no one can truly know how another person feels unless they ask them. And pay attention to what they say. Having someone tell you how you feel is incredibly disempowering. Number 31, finding it weird or silly when you cry or exhibit genuine empathy or emotion. So this is, again, a very clear display of a lack of empathy or emotion. If they look at you and they cannot understand why you're crying because somebody's dog died, even if it wasn't your dog, or they can't see why you're sad because the world is at war, that's a really clear indication that they are not wired to actually care about other people. Empathy is not weird. It's actually the normal, healthy human reaction. And people who don't have that empathy or have shut that down are really the disordered ones. But they will, again, they'll make other people feel like that is not the case because they want to always be right. So number 32, they make their problems much bigger than they really are. They assume the role of the victim. Again, I mentioned that earlier, saying things like, oh, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone, which is clearly lacking in perspective, and even a lack of empathy for the fact that everyone has difficult things happen to them. Number 33, they don't feel the need to help others. They don't give to charity or offer support when people are struggling. It's clear that their instincts that instinct doesn't even cross their minds. Number 34, exhibiting controlling behavior. It's always their way, yet if you dare to exert your desires, you're called a control freak. So this is, the hypocrisy comes in, but also their constant nature of control is also there. Number 35, not acknowledging or thanking you for gifts or things you've done for them. This is a weird one, and it took me a really long time to recognize this, but if you give someone a gift and they literally won't even look at you, or they won't thank you, or you do something for someone and they don't acknowledge it, it's as though it never even happened, that's an incredibly narcissistic reaction. They don't want to give another person the power. They don't want to give another person appreciation. And so they'll just ignore it as though nothing ever happened. They'll take the gift and maybe they'll even like the gift, but they won't tell you that. Number 36, giving thoughtless gifts. So this is an active way for them to clearly show you that you aren't important to them. So they might even ask you, what do you want for your birthday? And you tell them a list of all these cool stuff that you're thinking about. And they get you like something totally unrelated. Number 37, they refuse to put things in writing. And the reality for that is they don't want to be accountable for their words. So I had a manager who was like that. He was changing the protocol of how we did our work all the time. But he would only tell you verbally. And I would beg him, can you please email that? Could you just tell me? And I would follow him around with like a notepad, constantly taking his words writing them down, and he would get so flustered by it. But it was like, I need to know what I'm supposed to do. I need to have some roadmap. And he just would always refuse to do that. Number 38, they won't apologize. So again, they can't take responsibility for their actions. So they're also not going to admit that they're wrong. So why would they ever apologize to you? And the interesting thing is, if you are in a relationship with someone like this, you'll find that you're apologizing all the time. Because what you do is you take the responsibility for their issues, their problems, and you're apologizing to them and everyone else when they're the one who's done the thing that's wrong. Number 39, throwing temper tantrums. So narcissistic people are very emotionally immature. Just like a toddler, they're going to throw a fit if you prove them wrong, or you do something that they don't like, or you demand some accountability. They will literally like stomp their feet sometimes, or like just growl at you, or show like all these strange ways of expressing aggression that a normal adult wouldn't typically do. Number 40, they disregard laws and basic rules. So this is a sociopathic behavior. But the reason that a narcissistic does this is because they feel entitled and special. So the rules don't apply to them. They'll park in no parking zones, or they'll refuse to wear their seatbelt. It's just rules are for other people, not for them. The final 10 tactics are the trickiest because you want them to be true, or they are so unbelievable and also unrelatable that you can't believe anyone would be this cruel or manipulative. So number 41 is love bombing. They love bomb you with the most amazing compliments. They'll say the very things that you've always wanted to hear, just to manipulate you. And then over time, they stop offering compliments or praise at all. Number 42, they praise you without really knowing you. So this is someone who you meet them and very, very quickly, like maybe within the first conversation or two, they're telling you you're the best person they've ever met. You're the nicest person. You're the most attractive person. You're the most intelligent. Their compliments are extreme, and they're also way ahead of your connection and how well they know you. Number 43, playing the victim to feed off your empathy. So we kind of have alluded to this a couple times, but this is a very specific form of playing the victim, where they know that they can get you to feel bad for them. They know that they can get you to do things because you feel bad for them. So they'll tell you the worst scenario you've ever heard. They'll frame themselves as having just a terrible scenario when maybe their life isn't even as hard as they are portraying. They're just doing it to manipulate you. Number 44, ruining special events. So this is like they will throw you a surprise party when you hate surprises. So they will publicly make it look like they're a nice person, that they're doing something nice for you. But really, the event or whatever it is that they're doing is not how you wanted it at all. And that's very intentional. They're both getting all this credit for themselves, but they're sort of being cruel to you in an underhanded, really unbelievable way. It's hard to even pinpoint that someone would want to do this, but narcissistic people frequently ruin other people's special days, their weddings, their birthdays, and even funerals. They make it all about them because they cannot stand anyone else to have any attention. Number 45, they kick you when you are down. So if you experience a death or a health crisis, they refuse to help or support you in any way. It is as if they are happy to see you struggle because it makes it much easier for them to manipulate you. And they feel really powerful because, wow, look at how weak you are. It's scary to recognize this. So again, I had someone who was a family member who I would go to for support, and they would inevitably hurt me when I really needed it. So I was telling them that I was having severe panic attacks. And they said to me, "Oh my gosh, your poor husband." And I was like, oh my God, it hadn't really crossed, or actually it had crossed my mind that I might be a burden to him because I was having these anxiety attacks. But here is this person who's supposed to be a support bringing that very point up. And it was like they were shaming me and bullying me all at once. And it felt way worse than just having the anxiety attacks. Now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible wife, I'm a terrible partner, in addition to this crisis I'm going through. It's an extreme lack of empathy, and it's really cruel. Number 46, displaying willful or weaponized ignorance. So this is especially hard for anybody who's a perfectionist or an overachiever to actually recognize, because you can't believe someone would intentionally mess things up. Yet, that's exactly what they do. They get things wrong on purpose so that you will swoop in and fix the situation. It's super manipulative, but highly effective. So I've seen this at work. I've seen this in a former relationship where I ended up having to do the brunt of the work because other people were acting as though they just couldn't do it, when of course they really could. So number 47 is pretending to be an animal lover. So this one is super, super tricky, and it gets me every time. But what I have heard many, many times is that people in particular who work in like animal rescue or seem to have an extreme love for animals often are quite narcissistic. So the fact that they love animals seems to, of course, imply that they're a loving, caring person. Yet really, the reason why they love the animal is because the animal is such a pure source of unconditional love. And they're using the animal just like they would use a human. What you have to do is you have to ask yourself, do they love other people's animals too? Do they really self-sacrifice for their animals, or are they just doing it as an act? So I have actually seen this a couple times with people I was close with and realized that they didn't have the animal's best interest at heart. They were always just concerned about their own needs and treating the animal like it was a piece of property. Number 48 is pretending to be interested in nonprofit causes. So I have worked in the nonprofit field for most of my career, and I constantly see this, and it never ceases to amaze me. It shocks me, in fact. There are people who work in nonprofit that are doing it just so they have this persona of being a good, kind-hearted person, but it's mostly an act. They're not doing it for the inherent good of it. They're doing it to make themselves look good. And in many cases, they're doing it to make a lot of money. There are people in the nonprofit world who make a lot of money off of other people's suffering. And I think it's fine to make a lot of money if you're working really hard. But what actually typically happens at these nonprofits is the worker bees at the bottom are the ones who are doing all the long hours and putting in the advocacy and doing all the real on-the-ground work, and they're getting paid peanuts. And the people at the top are taking all the credit and making all the money. It's a really gross dynamic, and it's pretty consistent. Number 49, claiming to be highly spiritual and using that to be above others. So this is the holier than thou person. They don't practice what they preach. And in fact, a lot of times we see this with religion. They're preaching one thing and doing the very same thing that they're preaching against, you know, and this is a really scary and dangerous energy, because people with that kind of authority often have a lot of built-in ability to manipulate and use other people. And number 50 is the self-proclaimed healer. So I have been in the self-help world, I've been in the natural healing world for really all my career. And I have encountered these types of people who are really quite narcissistic with their healing abilities. The truth is, everyone has healing abilities naturally within their bodies. Someone who's actually saying, I'm a healer, I'm healing you, is being very narcissistic. They're taking way too much ownership in that process. People who are healers, especially like in the energy healing world, are conduits for the healing energy between the person who needs to be healed and themselves. And really humble healers know this. And they would never claim that they're magically healing other people. They will realize that they're in a collaborative partnership with other people. But again, this is a very dangerous way in which people can use and abuse people, because they will charge exorbitant amounts of money to heal people, when in fact the person is doing a lot of the work too. There always needs to be you as a part of the healing. So that was a lot, and I am sorry if this was negative, because I think I really wanted to do this deep dive so anyone who might not have this information would have it all in one shot. Again, if you didn't get all this, you want to ponder, there's going to be the link to the blog below that has all this information. As always, I wish you happiness and good health, and I thank you for being with me.